How can you get an interview at Google, and what does Google's interview process look like? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And my name is Steve. I'm with Hired&CO, and we are talking about Google's interview process here in this video. Now, maybe you're already scheduled for an interview with Google, or maybe you're wanting to get an interview with Google, and we're going to talk about those two things here today, some of the questions that you'll get in that interview, and what the interview actually looks like, what takes place, and what's the dynamic like. So the best way to get an interview at Google, let's just start off with that, is an inside referral. That is the best way to get an interview at Google. Okay? Now, if you get an inside referral at Google, they're going to call you within 48 hours. It's a guarantee. That is how Google's hiring process works. And the best way to get, I'll just put this up here, 48-hour callback. So if you, let's say, find somebody through LinkedIn that went to the same college that you went to, and you just send them a private message saying, hey, I really admire your career. I'm thinking about working at Google. I'd love to speak with you about the culture and what your thoughts are. Look forward to speaking with you soon. And again, it could be a little bit more fancy than that, but they're going to call you back in 48 hours after you kind of reach out to somebody, forge a good relationship, and ask them for an inside referral and work that referral. Once they put that in for you, there's a 48-hour callback from the recruiting department at Google. So if you don't have an inside referral, the second best way to get into the company is Google, their career site. I'll just put Google Career here. And they like people who are humble enough to just go to their career site and just apply like a regular candidate. And if you've got the credentials that stick out, they'll call you back. But the best way to do it is an inside referral, and that leads to a callback from a Google recruiter within 48 hours. So that's very powerful. Now, what does it look like once you get into the interview process with Google? That's what a lot of people are asking. And there's a lot of videos on YouTube that just talk about these ridiculous questions that Google used to ask, which were like, just to throw out some examples, how many golf balls can you fit inside a Boeing 747? Or how many baseballs can you fit inside the Empire State Building? Or how many bathrooms are there in Manhattan? And those were questions that they did ask to test a candidate's cognitive abilities, but they no longer ask those. So if you're thinking, what am I getting into? What kind of questions are going to be fired at me? What am I going to have to respond to in the interview? The interviewers at Google are not supposed to ask those anymore. And what Google does, they have a team, and I'll just actually put this up here. And each team member who does the interviews, there's a specific hiring team at Google. And traditionally at most companies, what they'll do is they'll have the vice president or the director of the role or the manager of that role interview the candidate after the recruiter does. Well, Google has their own people. There's teams that do the interviewing, so it's not as biased. And they don't want people hiring their daughters and their neighbors and things like that. So they've set apart a specific team to do the hiring that's more independent. And each team member on this hiring team is given what's called a Q guide. And the Q guide is a list of questions that are already prepared that each interviewer is supposed to ask the candidate for that specific role. So there's a Q guide for every single position that they hire for at Google. So that's kind of the way it works, and it's based off of this rubric. And you're probably saying, well, Steve, I really hope you have that rubric to show me here. I don't. Nobody has these. They're not made public. Only Google has them. There's never been one that's leaked. Don't worry, I already looked for it. I'll be honest with you. But I will tell you what Google looks for most in a candidate. And these are all of the interviewers, what they're looking for. Number one is people who are innately bright. Okay? They look for people who are smart. This really goes without saying with it being Google, but they look for people who are innately bright, who are just, very clever off the back. That's the second thing they look for, people who are clever. 3 and 4, I'm going to have to look at my notes here, but it's curious. And then 4th is going to be good problem solvers. Okay? So this is kind of the framework, and I'll write this up here, the framework for what Google is looking for in any candidate. Someone who's innately bright, clever, curious, and people who are naturally good problem solvers. So when you go into your interview, you want to be able to demonstrate and showcase these abilities, and maybe you want to think back on your experience and say, hey, where have I demonstrated these types of things? But these are just kind of the cultural values that most, if not all, all employees now at Google embody. These are just the principles that they look for in the hiring process with the candidates that they screen. Is this person innately bright? Is this person clever? Are they curious? And are they good problem solvers? And curious is, are you curious about your surroundings? Are you wanting to figure things out? Are you wanting to learn? Are you wanting to explore? Are you wanting to come up with new solutions? And you can really just take the rest of these. They're kind of self-explanatory. Now, that's kind of what they look for in a candidate in terms of characteristics and qualities. It's what they value. And what I share with people is, whenever you're going to an interview with anybody, with any company, you want to know what the company values, because a lot of people go into an interview and they're talking about themselves and what they're good at and what they did in their previous roles. And you really need to be talking about those things, but in a framework and in a lens to what that company values, because it's all about what they're looking for. It's about what they're hiring for. It's about what they value. And if you don't know what they value, or you don't speak to what they value, it's really not going to end up with a job offer. Whereas if you do talk about what they value, you're more than likely to get a position, because that's the thing. It's all about what they're looking for. Now, how is this process designed, and what does it look like? So the hiring process and the steps, I'll put them up here now. So once you get an interview lined up at Google, what are you going to actually have to walk through? Now, the first thing that they do is a work sample test, okay? And there's 4 steps to Google's hiring process. The first step is the work sample test. Now, this is what they want to see. They want to understand your ability to perform some part of that role that you would potentially be going into. So if, for example, you're a coder or a software developer, they're going to have you go up onto the dry erase board and start writing out programming language. If it's a marketing position, they may ask you to do, whether it's, if you're going into Google and you're actually traveling there, they'll probably already ask you to have a SWOT analysis or a pitch deck or something like that, to where you're demonstrating your work there in person. So that's the way that it works. That's the first step. And all technical hires go through this. So if you're a software engineer, software developer especially, you're going to be doing a work sample test, 100% guaranteed. You can 1,000% guarantee it, triple stamp it. You're going to go through a work sample test. So you've got to be ready to do that. And most people who are serious about interviewing at Google and they want a position there and they're dedicated and committed to it, know that that's coming. So that is number one. And what they look for in this is, and I'm just going to pull my notes up here because I want to give this to you with 100% precision. They are looking for in this how you deal with uncertainty, how you collaborate, how do you collaborate with others. Google is very big on collaborating with others because there's a really flat organizational structure. There's not a lot of hierarchy. So everyone's got to really work well in collaborating with others. But let's just say, and I'll just give the example of somebody who's a software developer and they're programming at the dry erase board and writing out that script. They're going to be throwing questions at that person saying, okay, we'll design this type of algorithm, and that's not my forte here, so you'll have to forgive me. But they'll have them up there doing an algorithm or something like that, and they'll throw out hypothetical situations and say, well, what if we did this? What if we did this? And I want to see how you respond to that uncertainty. Or if you're into marketing, if you're going for a marketing role, they'll sit there and say, well, how would you handle this situation if a customer called up and they said that they no longer wanted to continue going forward with their account? Or let's say their systems crashed, they called you, they can't access their Google accounts, how are you going to handle it? And they'll start throwing all these hypothetical situations and scenarios for you to respond to see how you are able to perform in uncertain and ambiguous situations. So that's what the work sample test is all about. And then the second part of this is how you collaborate with others. So when they're throwing those hypothetical situations out at you, or they're asking you to program these things, they want to see how good are you at communicating in this environment, in this dynamic. Are you asking clarifying questions to the interviewer when they're asking you to perform different things in front of them? Are you clarifying the question? So let me just make sure I understand this correctly. You want me to write this algorithm to do this, to accomplish this, measured by X, Y, and Z. So that's just an example, but they want to hear communication coming back from you. And communication is really key, because if you're just there programming in silence, or you're just saying a little bit and you're not really communicating that well, you will not get hired at Google. This is one of the things that Google prides itself on, is having great communicators in the organization. And I've spoken with directors, vice presidents, and presidents and managers, and even just regular employees, software developers, marketers, YouTube performance leads at Google. All of these people are brilliant communicators. And they bring a lot of great dialogue to the situations that they're in. Every time they sit down, they're very articulate people. So you've got to have your communication on its top notch when you're doing your interview. So that means top-notch communication with the interviewer. So that is number one. Second, in Google's hiring process, the second step. And so I hope you're taking notes. This is all really important stuff. And I don't think there's ever been a video that's gone into this type of depth. So I hope that you appreciate this. This is the general cognitive NIT, there's an I there, general cognitive ability test. So the way Google used to test for this was by asking those questions. You know, if you're in a building that, like we're in right now, a 7-story building, and it goes up in flames, design a emergency escape evacuation plan for the building right now. How would you do that? So they don't really ask questions like that anymore, but some of them still do. They're not supposed to, as I said earlier. But the way that you want to answer these cognitive ability tests are, you want to think the question out loud. They want to understand your thought processes. And when it comes to these questions, it's all about thinking this out loud. They want to understand how you think. They want to hear the type of solution that you would architect around the situation. If you just sit there in silence, that's really not a good sign. So you want to talk this out loud. You even do it on a piece of paper, whatever question that they ask you. And it's more about, it's not about having the right answer. It's not about having the right answer. It's about really just how you think about it, how you think about the answer that's most important to them. And so this is 29% of the emphasis in the hiring process at Google, is that general cognitive ability test. And if you're wondering before, the first this is 26% of the importance, rest here. 29% was the previous one, which was the work sample test. But they want to hear how you think about this and you approach solutions, and that's what the general cognitive ability test is for. So talk it out loud. It's not about having the right answer or getting to the right answer. They just want to hear how you would create a solution and how you think about it, and they want to know that you're thinking resourcefully. They want you to respond quickly too. They look for people that are quick, again, innately bright, clever. So your ability to come out with a solution, quick, is important. If you're sitting there like, and you're throwing a lot of ums and that's not really going to go over well. So you really need to be able to talk it out loud. It's not about having the 100% right answer, but how you would approach it. Share how you would approach that particular answer. And it could be something along the lines of, I know one of the questions that they did was, if you're a nickel and when I put you inside a blender, how would you escape? That was one of those crazy questions that they asked. But there's new questions that are designed to kind of test the candidate's cognitive ability. They're more related to the role now, but you just want to talk about how you would handle that question. The third step is structured interviews. Okay, and this is where it's a sit down, it's a one-on-one, sometimes it's a 4-on-1. There's usually 4 different interviewers that you'll meet at Google, okay? And in these structured interviews, they're going to ask behavioral questions and situational. So tell me about a time when you failed, and how did that impact your team? So what Google does is they don't just ask one question and then move on to the next. They'll ask a question, okay? That'll represent a question, and then they'll go deeper. So tell me about a time where you failed. How did that impact your team? What did you do after that point to keep moving forward? And then they'll dig even deeper. So there's usually one question, a follow-up, a third follow-up, second follow-up and a third follow-up. So that's how they ask these. And there's a lot of these behavioral questions, situational type questions, and you've got to be able to handle that. You've got to be able to respond to it. That's the third step in the process. And this accounts to 26% of the overall significance in Google's hiring process. So that's step 3 of 4, okay? And when it comes to number 4, the thing that Google looks for and does in their interview process, step 4 in the process is it's called conscientiousness or googliness. C-O-N-S-C-I-O-N. Sorry, it's sometimes hard to write and talk at the same time. So googliness is just, does this person really fit our culture and fit our values? And Google is really big on people who use we more than they use the word I. Someone's going into the interview and they're like, so we can do this, we did this on my team, on my previous position, we did this, and this. People who give credit to other people when it's come to the accomplishments that they've had in their career versus someone who just uses the I all the time. It really shows that they're not very conscientious, and if someone's very egotistical. So if someone's really egotistical or pride-filled, Google will not bring them on. They like people who are more humble, and Google is really about just people being people. So people go in there very formal and very corporate-like. Google's not that big on. It's more of a relaxed culture. You should still wear a suit going into an interview, but people want to be able to connect to people and who are kind of more low-key, who are authentic, and that's important. They really look to hire people, not somebody in a suit, if you understand that. And just humble people, relaxed people who understand that businesses aren't really businesses, it's just people who are going about work every day. So that's really important. They really look for problem solving ability. Just from my notes here, most candidates who score high on this conscientious test will complete a task to the end. That's what their studies have shown. These people feel responsible for their teams and the environments around them. They are more likely to act like owners than employees. So that's a really big thing, is people who act like owners rather than employees. They really look for that owner mindset, just because their structure there, their corporate structure is so flat. That's really big. So people who act like owners, if I could put so much emphasis on this, I would. This is really important. Google values candidates who can demonstrate the ability to work through something to completion. That's very important to them. And so these are the 4 steps in the Google interview process. I've got a lot more to share on this, and I'll probably do it in a follow-up video. But these are the 4 steps that they go through. This is the hiring process there at Google, and this is what every candidate goes through, whether they're coming in as an entry level or whether they're coming up or they're coming to the company to pursue a director position or even a VP position. This is the process that everybody goes through in an interview with Google. So I hope this is helpful. Again, the best way to get inside Google into this interview process is to have that inside referral. If you have an inside referral, you'll get a call back within 48 hours. And one thing you can do is click the link below and subscribe to our channel. We'll have more information on Google and their hiring process, some interview questions. You can go over to our website too, where we've got a lot of these at hiredandco.com.